Good morning, everyone. Warm welcome to CredAvenue webinar on revised RBI framework for securitization and loan transfer transactions for standard assets. My name is Vibhor Mittal. I'm the Chief Product Officer at CredAvenue. So the way we will run the event today is that we'll start with a quick presentation from our side, and that will be followed by a panel discussion. We have an eminent set of panelists who kindly consented to join us for the discussion today. And we look forward to hearing their views on this topic as well. So we'll start with our presentation first. I'll request the operator to project the deck, please. Yeah, thanks. Next slide. Yeah, so to begin with, we'll highlight some of the key changes which are now becoming applicable under the revised framework. A lot of these changes are factual, so I'll just quickly run over them. So first is that single loan securitization transactions, they have been permitted. Heterogeneous pool of assets can also be securitized. Earlier, the pool had to be homogeneous for it to be eligible for securitization. Another concern that some of the investors used to have is that whether replenishing transactions are permitted or not. While the legal view from most counsels was that that was possible even within the purview or ambit of the previous guidelines, but that has now been explicitly clarified in the revised circular. On MHP, there are one or two major changes. So one, the definition of MHP itself is now linked to number of months as opposed to number of installments. And the MHP will count from the date when the security is registered for secured loans where the underlying security can be registered. And for all other loans, which are either unsecured or where registration of security is not possible, it will be linked to the first repayment date. So that's one key change as far as MHP criteria is concerned. The other significant change is that the MHP requirement for longer tenor loans, which is more than 5 years, has been brought down. And they've completely delinked it from loan repayment frequency. So for mortgage transactions where the MHP requirement was 12 months, and now that stands reduced to 6 months. So that's again a significant positive for RMBS asset class. Next slide. Coming to the MRR criteria, again, there have been some relaxations made, especially for RMBS asset class. So earlier, the requirement for contracts with a tenor of more than 24 months was 10%. Now that still remains. However, only for RMBS, irrespective of the tenor, the MRR requirement has been made 5%. So again, I think the idea is to promote the RMBS market, and some of the recommendations which the mortgage committee, which RBI had set up for developing and RMBS market, those have also been implemented through this circular. What we also see, which is again a change to highlight, is that over collateralization will not be now included in MRR. So therefore, earlier, any exposure that the originator had through OC was also included in MRR. That would now no longer be possible, and therefore our expectation is that OC will probably start getting replaced with equity tranches to which the originator will subscribe to ensure that MRR requirement is met. In terms of maximum retention possible with the originator, that number remains at 20%. However, the denominator has changed. So earlier it was percentage of the security notes that were issued. Now it is as a percentage of overall securitization exposure, which will include your OC and funded reserves as well. So there is, as the denominator is getting enhanced, there is more headroom which is now available for the originator in terms of the credit enhancement that can be provided in the transaction. Some of the other changes are that a minimum ticket size for transactions that has been increased to 1 crore, and listing requirement, it has been made mandatory if the number of investors is 50 or more. Otherwise, it's more in a recommendation nature. Next slide, please. Credit enhancement criteria, again, they have been relaxed for RMBS transactions. So the first reset is now possible at 25% pool amortization stage as opposed to 50% amortization earlier. The reserve floor for credit enhancement reset has been set at 20% of the initial credit enhancement. So again, for RMBS transactions, these are some of the significant positives in addition to the MHP MRR criteria, because in RMBS, the assets amortize at a much slower pace, going to elongated tenors and therefore high cost of negative carry of cash collateral. That was a concern for the originators. That's been addressed to some extent. Also noteworthy to note that there are no specific delinquency triggers, unlike the 2012 guidelines, which are related for reset of credit enhancement. However, these triggers will be more contractual in nature, which will be upfront specified and agreed upon in the transaction documents, and reset would only be possible with the consent of investor and subject to these criteria not getting breached. Next slide, please. In terms of second loss credit enhancement, so there's no rating requirement for SLCE now, unlike earlier when SLCE had to be rated at a minimum investment grade level. However, we still feel that SLCE, if at all it is there in the transaction, will continue to be rated because the level of capital requirement against rated exposures is much lower than unrated exposures where there is full capital charge off, and we'll cover a little bit of that in more detail in terms of how the capital requirement would work out for originators as well as investors with exposure to securitization transactions is underlying. Another thing which is important to note is that in transactions earlier, recurring expenses, largely this could be in the form of rating agency fee, trustee fee, servicer fee, all that was being met out of the separately by the originator. Now what guidelines stipulate is that they have to be met from the pool cash flows itself so as to reduce the dependency on the originator in a bankruptcy scenario. And the security fee has to be sized on an arm's length basis, should be adequately budgeted for in the transaction. So what this would imply is that there could be an additional drain on the pool cash flows because usually these expenses would be senior in the waterfall, which could mean that credit enhancement requirement in respect of these transactions can go up marginally. There is also a concept of simple, transparent, comparable transactions or STC transactions which has been introduced. Idea being that transactions which are simple, transparent in terms of backed by verifiable data for with performance history over a long period of time. For such transactions, and there are some additional criteria that have also been stipulated, but for such transactions, the risk weights that would be applicable for securitization exposures would be much lower. And therefore, the expectation would be that the STC transactions can be priced much finer compared to non-STC transactions. And we'll again cover that a bit more in detail subsequently. Next slide, please. Liquidity facility. So requirement that 25% participation has to be from an external entity, that has been removed. Coming to the capital requirement, so earlier, what the guideline said was that any credit enhancement provided by originator, simply there was a knockoff from the capital, 50% reduction from tier 1 and 50% reduction from tier 2. Also, what the guidelines said is that even if the SLC is rated, still as long as it is being provided by the originator, there would be a complete knockoff. Now, the difference in the revised guidelines is that unrated exposures will continue to have full capital charge. However, rated exposures, the capital requirement, be it for the originator or the investor, would be driven by the rating and maturity profile of the exposures to which these counterparties have exposure. So we'll cover that in much more detail. And what is important to also note is that structures that have timely promise of payments, the way the maturity will be computed would be very different from structures where there's no timely promise and the promise is simply on the legal fund maturity date. So again, the risk weight computation, our understanding of the circular risk could be very, very different for the two structures that I mentioned, which are more prevalent, which is TITP and TIUP structures. One good thing is that guidelines continue to say that the credit enhancement requirement by the originator would continue to be capped at a level where that the originator would have had to provide if these assets were not securitized. So what it means is that a securitization transaction can result in a capital release, but irrespective of the credit enhancement provided, even if it is, let's say, more than 15% for NBFCs that have a capital adequacy requirement of 15%, it will still not be punitive on the originator. So the capital requirement against these exposures at an aggregate level would still continue to be capped at 15% or the capital adequacy requirement for the entity. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly cover some of the criteria that have been defined for STC transactions. Now this list is indicative, it is not exhaustive. Some of the key points we've covered in this deck, in this slide. So one, the pool should comprise of homogeneous assets. So if it's a single loan sell-off transaction or a heterogeneous pool of asset, it automatically becomes eligible for STC classification. You cannot include delinquent loans as part of the pool. The due diligence on sample contracts that needs to be performed prior to closing of the transaction. What guidelines also say is that there should be sufficient performance history available, which can be verified through data, and that performance history should not be less than 7 years for non-retail exposures and 5 years for retail exposures. Also, there are benchmarks around the granularity in terms of underlying pool composition. So the single obligor concentration should not exceed 1% or 2% depending on the structure of the transaction. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, we've just given some illustrations. So the first illustration is, where we have taken an example of a pool of 100, and we've assumed it's a commercial vehicle pool, where the originator is an NBFC. There is a credit tranching here. So we have a cash collateral of 5. We have a Series A1 PTCs of 85 and Series A2 PTCs of 3. Sorry, just a second. There is also over collateral of 12 and retention cap of 20%, which is applicable. Now we've compared how such a transaction would compare under earlier framework and the revised framework. So in the earlier framework, in the earlier framework, basically the denominator for computing the retention cap would have been CC plus OC, which would add up to 5 rupees plus 12. The notes which will add up to 85 plus 3. And therefore, the retention cap that would be applicable would be 17.6. And the actual MRR would be CC plus OC, which is 17. Now, in the revised framework, MRR will not be included, OC will not be included for MRR. So the actual MRR would be only 5, which is CC. Also, the retention cap, the denominator would be 105, which is the pool amount plus CC, which is the total securitization exposure in the transaction. And therefore, 20% of that would be 21. So while there's more headroom for the originator to provide credit enhancement, but still the originator ends up subscribing to the senior A1 tranche or the equity tranche for meeting the MRR in this case, or he has to replace the OC with some portion of equity tranche because OC is not getting counted towards MRR. Next slide, please. So in this example for the same pool, we've computed how would the risk weight work out for investors under the earlier framework. So let's assume that the senior tranche was rated at a AA level and the subordinated tranche was rated at an A+ level. Now, if the investor is a bank, which is our assumption, then risk weights that would be applicable would be 30% and 50% respectively for AA and A category ratings under Basel norms. We've also assumed that the weighted average maturity of PTC series A1 is 1.5 years and A2 is 1.6 years, while the legal final maturity or the scheduled maturity, final maturity date of both the PTC tranches is 4.5 years. And that will become, the maturity becomes important under the new framework. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now, under the new framework, we've shown how the risk weight would work out for senior tranches. Now, this computation is a slightly involved computation. I would encourage everyone to go through these computations once we share the deck with you subsequent to the webinar. And I'll not cover the computation itself, but I'll request everyone to focus on the last row of the table which we presented. So important thing to note here is that the risk weight is very, very different for STC versus non-STC transactions. Non-STC transactions would have much higher risk weights, and therefore they would be priced accordingly by the investors. So expect some, so while capital is not the only criteria that investors look at for pricing, but the pricing could be different for the two set of transactions. Also notable is that transactions that have monthly repayments, promised payments, which is TITP transactions, the average maturity that would be considered for computing risk weight would be the weighted average life of these tranches, which is 1.5 years for the senior tranche, whereas it is linked to the final maturity date for the TIUP structures. So it is much higher at 3.8. So the formula is 1 plus 0.8 times LFM minus 1. So that's how we arrive at this number. And therefore, if you interpolate the risk weights between 1 year and 5 year maturities, you would see that risk weights are significantly higher for TIUP structures vis-a-vis TITP structures. So for example, in non-STC transactions, TIUP will be 35.5%, whereas TITP will be 26.9%. Next slide, please. So here we've done the same computation for A2 tranches. So clearly, again, there is a difference in risk weight between non-STC and STC transactions, and also between TIUP and TITP transactions. In addition to that, what you'll also see is that risk weights are substantially higher for subordinated tranche as opposed to senior tranche. And this difference only gets enhanced as you move down the credit curve in terms of rating of the subordinated tranche. So while the two tranches, even if they are rated at similar level, just because a tranche is non-senior, it need not even be an equity tranche, it could be a mezzanine tranche. Anything other than the senior most tranche is a non-senior tranche. The risk weight on those exposures will be significantly higher, which means the capital requirement for the investors in those set of transactions will be much higher for investing in the A2Ps. So again, the expectation would be that the A2 tranche would have to be accordingly priced. Next slide, please. So these are some of the key takeaways which I've already covered. So difference in risk weight between STC and non-STC transactions. So all transactions, it will have to be upfront determined whether it is STC or non-STC. And that will influence the dynamics, just like it's PSL versus non-PSL as of now. This will be an added classification that will be important going forward. A2 tranche to carry higher capital requirement, utility of OC to come down as it is not included in MRR. We expect it to be replaced with equity tranche exposure from originator. Ultimate promise structures without any promised payments on a monthly basis, the utility will come down to some extent. And another key difference is that under Basel norms, within the same rating category, doesn't matter what the rating is, whether it is A+ or A-, the risk weight is the same. But in the revised framework, every notch difference in rating would actually matter, because the risk weight increases progressively as you keep moving down notch by notch. Next slide, please. So I'll now move to the next part of the presentation, which is on transfer of loan exposures. And we'll not be covering transfer of stress assets in our discussion today, we'll restrict ourselves to transfer of only standard assets. Next slide, please. So here, essentially, there are very few restrictions now on which type of loans can be transferred. So technically, even bullet loans, if the underlying security can be registered, can be transferred. Obviously, if that is not the case, then MHP criteria will not be met, and therefore possible, for example, for gold loans which have bullet repayment of principal and interest. Again, assets purchased from other entities after you've held them on the books for 6 months, they become eligible for securitization. So that's again an added advantage, and that could increase the potential supply of assets in the market. MHP requirement largely the same as the securitization transactions that we covered earlier. On MRR, the MRR requirement can be completely done away with in DA transfer transactions. So the originator can now actually transfer 100% of the pool loans. However, there is a caveat to this. For that to happen, the purchaser or the acquirer will need to do 100% loan level diligence on the underlying pool contracts. And this is not an activity that can be outsourced to a third party as well. If that is not the case, then a 10% MRR requirement will be applicable. But even for that, at least at a minimum level, 1/3 of the pool loans would need to be diligenced. So the relaxation MRR is again a significant positive for DA transactions. Credit enhancement from originator continues to be disallowed. Even third-party credit enhancement, if the third party is a regulated entity, is now not permitted, which was possible earlier. Next slide, please. Upfront profit booking is permitted. Having said that, one thing which guidelines says that any profit cannot be used for boosting the capital adequacy ratio. To that extent, the capital would need to be knocked off. So while it helps in boosting the profitability, the same impact on capital would not be there. Accounting has to be done at a loan level by both the transferor and the transferee, which is again a key significant change, may require some operational process level adjustment at the end of the investor. Earlier, they had the flexibility to book loans at an aggregate level or loan level. Now they will need to book loans in their system at a loan level only. Next slide, please. So this is essentially the broad assessment, in our view for the framework, that in the long term, guidelines are clearly positive and a step in the right direction. Our belief is that will result in enhanced transparency, depth, and expansion of the market in the long term. Some of the bottlenecks which are constraining the market, they have been significantly addressed. RMBS asset class is a key beneficiary of these guidelines, and that market should pick up steam. Also, what is important to note is that there's a lot of emphasis now being put on risk-based pricing framework, greater transparency, reporting requirements have been made more stringent in terms of disclosure requirements. So all that is positive for the long term, and clearly the market seems to be heading in that direction. Listing of the PTCs, for example, is being encouraged. So we don't expect that to change overnight because it's still recommendatory in nature and not mandatory. But still, again, clearly the regulator seems to be nudging the investors in that direction. So we believe that more robust infrastructure would need to be put in place by the investors for monitoring and taking exposure to DA as well as PTC transactions going forward, including their pre and post disbursement requirements, reporting requirements, and compliance related requirements. Next slide. So essentially, CredAvenue is a one-stop provider for meeting all infrastructure solution needs of the investors, which can help investors throughout the life cycle of the transaction. Next slide, please. I think with that, we've come to the end of our presentation. So I will like to hand over the control to my colleague Ramadasu. Ramadasu is head of pool platform business at Credivenue. And he'll be moderating the panel discussion which we've lined up today. Over to you, Ramadasu.
Thank you, Vibhor. Just thank you for the insights on the guidelines. So we have some of the eminent panelists on the panel today. To start with Mr. Dio Shankar Tripathi, CEO and MD of Aadhar Housing Finance. And Mr. Vineet Jain, he's head structured finance care ratings, and previously he was heading structured finance division at IDFC First Bank. And we have Mr. Nihaz Bashir, is a partner, senior partner at Vadai Gandhi. In the structured finance market, I don't think so. We need to introduce Mr. Nihaz. So just moving to so to start with, how do we we have a couple of questions for all the panel members. Once we concluded that questions, we can have a questions. We can accept the questions from the participants who are there. So I request all the participants, whoever the questions, just please type in the chat, so we can pick up based on the time availability and all. So my first question is to Mr. Tripathi. Sir, good morning. So as a morning, sir. As a mortgage financer, I think you must be delighted that with the revised set of guidelines, MHP and MRR requirements have been relaxed for RMBS transactions, and credit enhancement criteria has become less stringent. It appears that many of the recommendations made by the committee set up by RBI for development of RMBS market in India have been implemented. How do you think this will help in growth of mortgage securitization market and financiers like you are like Aadhar? Just I wanted to hear you, sir, just a couple of points on this.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you CredAvenue for having me on the panel. You see, just little go back to September 18 onward, the position. Ever since the Reserve Bank of India has been trying to create a proper market with proper governance for the not only HFCs, for NHB and all that, so that they can have a long-term liquidity. Number one, they should also ensure that the investors should also have a confidence, and that's the reason the couple of measures the Reserve Bank of India has taken. One, the liquidity to avoid asset liability mismatch. All those things have taken. Prior to pandemic, the securitization market rose to 2 lakhs crore rupees, but largely from the HFCs, it used to be the transfer of loan exposure assignment. But more particularly, the residential mortgage-backed security market, which is globally very extraordinarily operative. They normally work with the RMBS only. That is more important when you deepen the investor base. Right now, only the banks and few companies were mutual fund, and they have been investing in the RMBS. Otherwise, it was only a bilateral transaction. The RMBS market, if we have to widen the market participation, so the guidelines which were much needed, which Reserve Bank of India has brought out, these are very positive guidelines. One, as you have rightly mentioned, that one is the MHB. You see, from September 18 to June 2020, when the problem was going on, Reserve Bank of India reduced 12-month MHB to 6 months, and 20% MRR they have kept. But thereafter, the guidelines were reverted back to the original guidelines before September 18. So now with these guidelines, what the mortgage lenders have been requesting that you reduce the period. That's why the Reserve Bank of India reduced the period to 6 months, particularly because our loans are more than 2 years. NBFC loans are less than 2 years. For them, it is 3 months. So first, they have made a 6-month period of retention. And more importantly, the 6-month period starts from the date of registration of interest on securities. In our case, we create the mortgage, and that is the interest on securities. Some confusion might happen, which probably Vadai Gandhi can explain, that registration registration in case of equitable mortgage, we don't go for doing registration in many states where it does not require. In many states they require registration, we do it. But according to my own perception, the equitable mortgage itself costs registration, because that in terms of law, equitable mortgage and legal mortgage are having same meaning. So that is one point which the Reserve Bank of India has brought very clearly, very positive. Coming to the MRR, as Vibhor was just mentioning, that once the lender does a complete due diligence, the MRR requirement becomes zero. That is another positive thing. If lender does only 1/3 of due diligence on the portfolio level, then only 10% is required. So it depends. Only what will happen, the period of 120 days within which the lenders were supposed to complete and reject the security and replace security, that is brought to 30 days. The timeline is a bit tight, and probably because of the 100%, mostly lenders are these days doing 100% due diligence. They are not relying on the part of due diligence. In case I'm talking about assignment and not RMBS. So in that case of assignment case, probably it will be tight to complete the deal at time. It may be delayed also, but that doesn't matter. Now coming back to again RMBS, he mentioned before rightly, STC is one of the very great concept. Second is a credit enhancement that can also be revisited after 25% of the mortgage pool is amortized. That is one plus point. Third plus point, they have mentioned that every 6 months after that you can do it. So all these are very positive points which they have done. And with the STC, that is simple, transparent and comparable concept they have brought, the requirement of capital adequacy will come down. And moreover, the RBI has also suggested that the securitization has to be the external risk-based rating about the capital adequacy, and STC concept will give much needed confidence to the investor for investing in the pool. And if 50 and above investors are there, it has to go for listing. All these are going to invite or attract large number of investors who otherwise are looking for the various instruments to invest their surplus money with confidence. So that is very positive. Only one or two things which is not applicable for HFCs. Some HFCs are giving loan to the small NBFCs or small HFCs. Some bigger HFCs are doing that. You cannot do securitization, but that is applicable to some few bigger HFCs, not to the all HFCs they are giving to small HFCs. So I think second thing, the small HFCs will have some little bit of problem that their pool may be less and all that, but that I think the platform like Credit Avenue can support that, and Credit Avenue platform, the way you have developed yourself, that is going to help largely. In case of assignment, one thing what Vibhor mentioned, that whatever the upfront profit we book in NDS, that cannot be taken as a part of capital adequacy. Though this is not a part of question of yours, but I am just replying to you. I think if you take in a broader perspective, this is a right decision taken by Reserve Bank of India. You are taking profit. Once you assign the pool to the lender, your capital adequacy requirement on that pool comes down because that is out of your books. And second side, you are adding profit for the purpose of capital adequacy. You are taking two advantages from same assignment of pool. So I think it was going on, but today it is, I don't think it is a negative, but it is more positive. So according to what I feel, that the RMBS transactions needs to be strengthened in the country so that HFCs can operate on the very asset light model, source with their ability to sourcing, and they can sell it. Other than securitization, co-lending model is available. So I think Reserve Bank of India has given a lot of arsenal to HFCs to manage their liquidity, manage their asset liability, manage their business, and all these things, which I personally feel are very positive.
Thank you, sir. So, sir, you have left some of the questions in your this thing itself. I'll come back to you this thing. So next I'm going to Mr. Nihas. Just Nihas, this is the most burning, while we are speaking, everyone is asking about this MHP. So I think for pool selection criteria, I think this is one of the important, so even people are just waiting, to close the transactions during this quarter. And so, and a lot of the pool is becoming ineligible because of this new formula, like, otherwise data is not available there. Just in relation to this, I have one question, so that MHP computation has been linked to security interest date or for data first installment. How it will work for vehicle loans or or car loans or two-wheeler, whatsoever there, just this thing. And the same, how this applies to an equitable mortgage, because there is no registration involved in equitable mortgage. Just can you just address these things, so I think everyone wants to hear this thing, whosoever are there in this is one of the important. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, Ram. So I think, very, very important question on what they mean by registration. Now, the sad part is RBI has really not given us any background or any kind of indication to what they mean by registration. Now, registration, if you ask me, traditionally refer to a requirement for transfer of interest in immovable property. So whether it is, registration of mortgage, etc., all of that. But we just don't have that clarity from RBI as to is that the way they've used it now. So therefore, assume that we have to go the other way and say, okay, let's not look at basic registration angle, but what all possible registrations are there. So today, if you ask me what all possible registrations are there, there is sub-registrar, which is for immovable property and mortgages. 2, you have ROC registration where company is a borrower. 3, you have even civil registration, the CERSAI registration, which you do for getting SAFESI benefit. And 4th, if you want to extend it further for vehicles, you also have the RC book, which comes with the hypothecary as a lender on record and being recorded on the RC book. So registration as an English language word might mean all of this. But legally, I would like to pin it down to, something under the Transfer of Property Act or the Registration Act. Because really everything else is, something that more borrower compliance than, something that lender will look at. So here it's a problem of, not having the background with us as to what RBI intended when they kind of use that word registration. So assume we take a very limited and very strictly legal interpretation and say that, okay, fine, let's look at only registration as required under the Registration Act. Now, even if you look at that, there is an option to register anything under the sun under the registration. Forget what is compulsory required to be registered. So when RBI said for unsecured loans or loans where security cannot be registered, there's really nothing that cannot be registered, because under Registration Act there's an optional registration. So really there's quite a bit of confusion on how this will be interpreted. But I think it's fairly reasonable to say that, assuming that we cannot agree on what is the interpretation of the word registration, even if security has been created and you are able to follow the standards applicable for unsecured loan securitization, which is 6 months from the first repayment, you should be okay. I don't think RBI would say that, okay, fine. I mean, for unsecured loans, which have absolutely no backing, I'm fine with a particular standard. But for secured loans, I want to introduce an even higher standard. I would think that if you're able to establish at least, the track record which is there for unsecured, you should still be able to securitize or transfer your loan. Of course, there's the problem with something like a project loan, where I think even in the previous regulations, they were very clear, only operational risk, construction risk should not be passed on, only operational risk should be passed on. So those kind of things we just have to be a little mindful of. But otherwise, I think even if we can't kind of conclude on what RBI meant by registration, even if we're able to meet the standard for what they are set out for an unsecured loan, we should be able to kind of go ahead is what I think. And I don't think RBI intended to prohibit something like that.
Thank you, Nihas. So I think people would have been just happy, for this answer. So my next question again comes to Nihas, is very open-ended question. Are you happy with the revised framework put out by RBI? And any ambiguities are points which are not clear and need more clarity from the regulator?
So regulations, I mean, some of this is still what was there in the draft regulations which they brought out. So definitely all of us thought that even in the draft form, the regulations had really good intentions from, the perspective that they were allowing a lot more relaxations. They were letting the market make decisions on what is securitizable and what is not, instead of putting prescriptions and stipulations which prohibited, for example, like single loan securitization, or insisting on MRR even when the acquirers are NBFCs and banks, etc. So from that way, I think the regulations is definitely a positive step. The problem is they've come out bang in the middle of the end of our quarter. And I think everyone's plans just went for a toss. I mean, I don't know if anyone had an inkling that this was going to come out. It was the fag end of a financial quarter. And I would assume that people would have lined up between these 4 days at least some 20 to 30 transactions.
Yeah.
Of which, however good a regulation is, someone still has to read it and tell the parties that, okay, fine, whatever you're doing is in compliance with this. So I think timing is the biggest drawback in how they've introduced the regulations. But otherwise, the intent of the regulations seem good. There are obviously clarification issues that will burn us for some time. So like some of the things which come to mind is like they've set out a set of exempt transactions under your BA, under your sale of transfer of assets guidelines, which include exit of line of business, etc. Which under the earlier guidelines were exempt from complete purview. Right now, you still have to comply with what they've set out as Chapter 2, which includes no credit enhancement can be given, etc. So someone who wants to exit a line of business, if the only way someone will take a loan is if he provides some credit enhancement, it makes no sense for RBI to say, no, that is also not permitted. And you take a loss upfront itself, instead of kind of having some kind of an arrangement where, they could provide some credit buffers and kind of not get into too many valuation discussions. So some of it, obviously, we'd like to kind of see how it finally plays out and whether RBI kind of comes out. And so most of it, I think, our issues will find once we do more transactions, more than anything.
Thank you. Just with this, I'm going to Mr. Vineet Jain. See, one question, Vineet, so I think RBI has come out very clearly now. All the recurring expenses need to be so just cash flows need to absorb those recurring expenses once the transaction has been done. So just related to this thing, recurring expense of the trust would need to be met from the pool cash flows. Servicing fee component may also go up as it must be determined basis arm's length basis. So how, I don't know, someone assume or arrive at what is the servicing cost for the particular transaction. And how do you think that would impact the just credit enhancement requirement for various asset classes? So why we are asking is the servicing fee is very high, for some of the asset classes two-wheeler or microfinance. How would because there is a significant EIS is going to get hit because of this thing. So how do you assess that credit enhancement just while taking into account of all these things?
I'll just take 1 minute. I'll take a step back, and on the guideline, I would like to make one point and then RMBS. So when you look at these regulations, unlike 2006 or 2012 regulations, which completely froze the market, I don't think there is similar impact here. This guideline looks to be more constructive and actually clarifies many of the things which were actually being followed in the market. So that's the first quick comment that I have on the guideline. On RMBS, that is the next big thing. Certainly, international experience says so. We have not yet witnessed the kind of traction that RMBS has got internationally. And that is primarily driven by the lack of investors in India. The investors that we have in India is largely hold to maturity. The market is largely driven by banks, and they have preference for building the loan book rather than adding to the investment book. So that's the key thing which is there. So STC recognition for RMBS separately, positives on the guidelines, all are there. It should aid development of the market. One point that I would like to probably understand or which has to be seen is more in the context of MRR. There is noise around the market that MRR is reduced from the number of installment is come down to, let's say, 3 months or 3 months or 6 months from the date of registration. There was points made by Nihas on the registration. Typically, in a home loan, people had to wait for full disbursement to happen before the MSP could have kicked in earlier. Even today, when the registration has been done, if the loan is not fully disbursed, right, I don't think there would still be possible to securitize it, because then obligation can't be transferred. So in case of under construction loan, again, I think there would be some constraint, although the regulation allows it to be securitized. That's one point that came to my mind. Nihas could probably do more justice to this particular part of this thing. Another thing that I was saying was more in terms of listing. Listing would certainly add. There is framework for listing currently. All these are long-term measures that I think reflects the intent of the regulator, which is in the right direction. Coming back to Ramdasu on your question on meeting the recurring expenses, etc. My reading of the guideline, again, unless I'm missing something, is that it is in line with what was earlier regulation. I am not able to make out any specific change in that context from the regulation perspective. Having said that, if these expenses are to be made by the trust, right, obviously it is going to have a negative impact on the credit enhancement numbers. So that's how it is. In terms of how to factor that in terms of trustee expenses, etc., I think are minute. Rating expenses, trustee expenses, legal expenses. The biggest cost component would be collection charges, right? And I don't think there is a yardstick that anybody has. It would have to be seen in light of specific transaction in specific issuer, whether collections are to be done in case, whether the track record of the originator is such that the collection are coming to RTGS, etc. So it would have to matter in the context of the originator and the asset class that we are looking at.
Okay, thank you. So Nihas, so just coming back to you, on the same MRR MHP, just I'm taking the cue what Vineet was saying. So in commercial vehicles also there is a moratorium period, typically 2 months, 3 months when we are giving this thing. So that vehicle would have been registered, but we are not completing the 6 months, 6 installments, like what we were doing previously, as per old guidelines. So how do you see that this thing, so installments would have completed might be 3 months because of 3 months moratorium. So is it originator is able to securitize those assets, even if 3 installments have been completed, but that loan would have been given 6 months before, or registration would have happened 6 months before?
So again, it comes down to the fact that, in vehicle loans, how are you establishing security interest has been registered, right? But I don't know, if you're saying that, I've got my RC endorsement, is that sufficient? I would take a little conservative call there and I'll say, yeah, wait for 6 installments to have come in. I mean, not 6 installments, at least from first installment, 6 months have passed or 3 months have passed before you kind of do that. But of course, I mean, if there is some clarity given on what exactly registration would imply in the vehicle situation, yes, we can look at it. My gut is, even if a clarification comes, RBI is going to say, when we said registration, we were talking about mortgages. We were not talking about anything else. That's my feeling. And therefore, for vehicle, you are stuck with 6 months or 3 months from first payment is what I would think.
Okay. From this, I'm just moving to Mr. Tripathi. So reporting requirements for PTCs as well as loan transfers have been made more comprehensive. So how do you see the market players will step up to manage and comply to such requirements?
Yeah, I agree that this regulation provides even quarterly reporting of all PTC items, and other reportings have also been made. Even If you pay some damages and you take back the security replace, that is also to be reported. Smaller HFCs, smaller companies might find it cumbersome to report, but the platform like yours are available in the market. And today in the present circumstances, certain things you can outsource. Reporting is not provided to be outsourced. Like due diligence, you cannot outsource, but this can be outsourced. Moreover, if you are going to be a long-term player, sooner or later, even small players have to create their own platform. They have to strengthen their back-end processes. If they are going to securitize, even the lenders keep on asking so many information. So that information has to be given. If they are not having presently, they can outsource to a platform like you. And if the services will definitely are going to be good with a lower cost, then that makes sense to outsource or you have in-house. So I don't think that we want money also and we do not want to report. Both things cannot go together. Certain things have to be complied with. That has to be done. One thing what Vineet was mentioning about the under construction property, that's a very valid point, Vineet, you have raised, that today also no lender takes the property which is under construction in assignment. RMBS has not been very popular, so I can't say about that, because in RMBS, whether you can do under, because 6 month period will be definitely over, but the construction period may go at 12 months or 18 months time. So I do not know what Vibhor and Nihas had also mentioned that regulator what intend. The registration word still needs clarification. Security interest transfer, I think Nihas will be much competent here, very elaborated. With the equitable mortgage or hypothecation agreement to take, the security interest is transferred. But I think regulator specifically want registration so that third party can view it. I think it is so, but that needs some clarification. But I am sure that no lender is going to take under construction property. How RMBS will be viewed, that actually will come only when we start doing it.
Okay, so because of this time constraint, like just I have a couple of questions to Nihas and Vineet. So this is also one more burning question, like Nihas, like would loans restructured during COVID period be eligible for securitization?
I think there the RBI has clearly in the COVID circulars itself said that these assets will not be considered as restructured assets for the purpose of the prudential norms, etc. And I think that view can continue to be taken. That when they said restructured assets are prohibited, they don't mean restructured assets under the COVID circulars, where they clearly said that will not be considered as a restructuring for prudential norms purposes. I think that view you can still continue to take as long as it's just a COVID permitted restructure.
But Nihas, in case of retail asset, they of course has mentioned, but they have used the word specified period. That is also used in the regulation, and all those assets which have been other than retail, there in a restructured guideline itself, a specified period has been laid down. So restructured asset cannot be securitized under a specified period. Then of course they become a normal asset. I think that is my understanding. Sorry to my interruption.
No, Mr. Tripathi, I completely agree with that. If your asset got into the restructuring as defined under the prudential norms, then obviously you have to wait for the specified period to get over. So there are people who have done just over and above what is permitted under the COVID guidelines, they have done something additional, which then you go back to your prudential norms itself. So I think to that extent, yes, you will still be a restructured asset which is prohibited. But you have limited yourself to what is permitted under the COVID restructuring, and where they've specifically said, if you meet these criteria, it will not be treated as a restructured asset. Then I think you can still go ahead and securitize it.
Okay. So Vineet, just a question to you. So any additional checks and balances that rating agency would need to be put in place for evaluate transactions going forward? So I can hear and sense that you feel because the guidelines have not completely changed or moved away from the earlier avatar.
So especially in terms of evaluating the transactions, certainly note that the process of evaluating the transactions on at least on the securitization basis is well established. I don't think guideline entail any requirement in that sense that somebody need to change the evaluation process itself. yes, the composition of OC, the number of tranches, all those is going to get impacted by this. There might be slight changes there, right? So that's a function of the modeling. I would not say that it would need a new way to look at it. That's the way we are looking at it. There would be new checks and balances, but those would not entail that you have to change processes, etc. We typically look at the pool that we get it. So that's more of a sanitization that has to be done certainly.
So Nihas, just one last question, and afterwards, I'm just taking the questions from the audience. So where the audience have just put across. So while not directly just relevant to the topic, the discussion today, so you might not feel comfortable, but yes, there have been some concern around that impact on bond covered bond transactions. So so for topping up the cover pool assets and all, so can you address the audience, especially this is most especially for transactions which are existing, so I think a lot of people are underrating is also are worried, so what is going to happen and all.
Sure. So see, on covered bonds, honestly, none of us have even focused on it because of the fact that we're just trying to get across for existing transactions on the next 3-4 days. But the gut and what our view has always been that a regulation cannot kind of retrospectively make a transaction illegal unless it specifically spells it out. So in my covered bond transactions which have already happened, if an originator has already undertaken a transaction, he's also undertaken an obligation to maintain security cover, to transfer assets to the trust from time to time. I don't think a regulation can come and, because of the way it's worded, indirectly kind of stop those transfers. And if that was the intent, the principles of interpretation of law is that if the legislature intends to do something of that sort, they need to spell it out. So to the extent that they haven't spelled it out, then it creates an absurd situation where you have a transaction which predates the regulations, which is getting impacted by the regulations, but the regulations have not addressed it specifically. To that extent, where an interpretation results in absurdity, I think the interpretation of law has always been you favor the transactions which predate the regulations and you let it continue. And whatever structuring you've done, etc., all of that which was there before the regulations, you're allowed to continue on that basis. And that is where we think the interpretation should land even for this.
Thank you, Nihas. I'm just taking the questions where audiences are put across. Mr. Pranay Pokra. This is the question is from Mr. Pranay Pokra. The securitization circular states that OC would not be part of first loss tranche, but I think they're referring about the presentation which you have given. You are suggesting that it would not be part of MRR. So is that correct? So Nihas, if you are you can take this. The question is, the securitization circular states that OC would not be part of the first loss tranche, but you're suggesting it would not be part of.
So if you so what happened was under the 2012 regulations, when they said what is first loss facility, they clearly said any cash, including over collateral, etc., all of that. They said that. I think they're trying to make a distinction now because of the usage of the term equity tranche. And they're trying to say, an over collateral is nothing but an equity tranche because that is an investment of the originator in the asset that is sold. I think to that extent, they're just trying to make a distinction between first loss and equity tranche. But I think anyhow, from MRR perspective, they've kind of diluted the requirement from earlier to kind of say that anything above 5%, you can pick and choose how you want to kind of invest. It's only the first 5% they've stipulated a waterfall. So I think this is more clarity from how do you see an over collateral, which I think ought to be seen as an equity transfer, right? Because at the end of the day, it's part of the asset that the originator is investing in. There's a transferred asset to the SPV, and the over collateral is nothing but originator's investment in the SPV to that extent. Therefore, probably best to see it as an equity transfer. I think it's more clarificatory in nature than anything else is what I would think.
Thank you. So there is one more question which is related to equity tranche. Is that first of all, like guidelines doesn't clearly mention is that rating is compulsory for all the tranches or not? Is it, what is this equity tranche? And like the question is, and I'm adding to that what question has been, is the rating is compulsory for equity tranche?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah, so someone is asking, is the rating is compulsory for the equity tranche?
I would think, always all PTCs issued by the trust were meant to be rated. And even now, I would think that is the case. But obviously now, in the current regulations, there is a flexibility to have unrated securitizations also. It's not necessary that you have only rated securitization. The consequences are different if you are doing an unrated securitization. But to the extent you're doing a rated securitization, I would think the equity tranche needs to continue to be rated. It is an instrument being issued by the trust to the originator.
Okay. Sir, this question you can take it, Mr. Tripathi. So will resale of securitization loans boost the secondary markets and improve the risk discovery in India?
Well, of course, the pool which we acquire from somebody else, we can again securitize after 6 months. So only 6 month period is there. So probably, suppose today for increasing our loan book, we have taken the pool and tomorrow we need security. So that will definitely boost the market because this will enlarge the pool. So I think that it is a very, very positive step that if you can securitize the assets which you have acquired further after 6 months, that is, but what asset you have taken as securitization, that you cannot do. I think Nihas, if I am understanding correct, what asset I have taken as securitized, we can do only after 6 months, not before that.
That's correct. I think the only thing is not what is securitized, what is acquired. So
acquired.
You
What
can't
is acquired?
securitize PTCs.
Yeah, what is acquired? Yes. So that will definitely enhance the market.
Okay. Sir, and one of the question is what is required, for just improving the RMBS markets in India, So as Mr. Vineet, it's both to Mr. Tripathi and Mr. Vineet. The reason is Vineet is also handled an investment desk from IDFC. So just I wanted to hear from both of you, so we have been saying RMBS, but it never been taken off in India. So it could be that no investors other than this investors banks just typical are as Mr. Tripathi said, is only bilateral. Just can you add the point on it, so what requires, what type of infrastructure is need to be developed in India to develop that RMBS market?
I will just reply, but then I will hand over to Vineet because he is from rating agency and he has handled IDFC desk also for investment. Actually, first I think that as Mr. Vineet in beginning mentioned that bank always are hungry of increasing their loan assets. And it is very simple. Assignment becomes very simple. But that is actually the problem. Once the assignment market is slightly slowed down, then direction will move. One thing. Second thing, for the originator by selling these through RMBS, they are able to get at the lower cost, probably that will definitely enhance. Suppose I am selling a bank at assignment pool at 7.5%, and I am able to give in RMBS at 7%, so my attraction will go. All in cost, that is one matters. The one that enabling environment has to come. Second, the bank appetite should come down, and many investors like mutual fund, like insurance fund, individual investors, if they start thronging into that, I think some tranches has to be done to create the encouragement in the market, which RBI has done through regulation. which RBI has done through regulation, but other than the regulation, it has to be put in practice by the various originators and various buyers also. Then probably it will automatically move. It might take some medium term and long term time. It may not happen in 6 or 8 months time, but it will happen. But I tell you, the foreign banks, they always insist for the securitization market, securitization only. They don't go for the assignment of pool. So it is one that who are the buyers for you. The buyer pool is get increased, the market will automatically develop, and of course that attraction should be for the both. That is what my the business view what I am trying to tell you. Now I hand over to Vineet.
No, so I totally agree with what you said, Mr. Tripathi. My sense on this would be 2-3 dimensions are there to this. First and foremost is the investor preference. Now you mentioned very clearly that foreign banks have a preference for PTCs rather than doing the DA. That's more driven by the regulatory compulsions or requirements that you have around direct assignment compared to PTCs. That probably explains what's going on in the minds of multinational banks in terms of choosing a particular product in DA PTC. From RMBS perspective, the underlying asset class we are looking at is mortgage, housing mortgages, which are the safest. Investors, at least banks in India, who are the largest investors today, right, in this segment, because of the variable interest rate as well as the longer tenor, right? They have preference to grow the books, and they don't really see a significant risk emitting out of this portfolio. So they are sort of agnostic in terms of looking at the credit enhancement and AAA rating. Now with this revised framework, which has been put in place, which is risk weight of 10% if you follow the STC, that could be a bit of game changer, right? If you really want RMBS market to grow in India, I think two very critical things needs to be done. One is to ensure that you get new investor base in the market, right? Currently, your mortgage market is completely driven by banks. Second thing that you have to do is to make it more price efficient in terms of investors, right? When you look at it, you look at from price efficiency perspective as an originator. When investors looks at it, he has to eventually, unfortunately today, has to look at from hold to maturity perspective, because there is no secondary market. So if somebody has to issue a AAA paper, right? He looks at, let's say, SDFC, LIC, etc. So there are two components goes into that pricing. One is your credit risk. Second is the liquidity premium. So these papers are extremely liquid. So liquidity premium is not very high. When we map ourselves to, let's say, RMBS, right? The liquidity is largely not there. It's literally absent. So if regulator could do something on the liquidity front, right? Like you have the mortgage guarantee corporation nowadays, right? If RBI could come and say that this is the institution which could provide liquidity, let's say at every interval of, let's say, 5 year, 3 year, 2 year, whatever that is deemed appropriate, there could be liquidity facility provided on these facilities where the investor could exit if you want to exit after a particular point of time, depending on whatever framework is there. That could be a game changer. That would improvise not only the investor appetite, it would reduce the tenor, shorten the tenor requirement expectation. It will give the liquidity, which will help it price more efficient. So if actually the Reserve Bank is looking at developing the RMBS market, the steps that they have taken are very fine, very good steps to take, right? It would show result in times to come. If you really want to speed up the process, something has to be done to comfort the investor and improve the pricing expectations there.
Okay. Thank you, Vineet. So I have a just since it's been, we are crossing the time, just we have only 2 points, like, just one is question and second is to Nihas. Just I'm giving this point to Nihas. Nihas, I think you need to do some event like on that MHP, like I'm just getting tens of questions on that MHP. So I since we don't have time, like I may not be able to just take all the questions here. So this my question is last question is to Mr. Tripathi, sir. Like so as you said, like so that will improve the secondary market, like so for direct assignment transactions, then risk will be discovered. So what are the steps, like what type of infrastructure is required, like in India, like just to improve that market, like basically, like banks currently are heavily purchasing these assets, like so for whatsoever the reason, tomorrow if you wanted to exit or if I want to sell down to other this thing, other banks are like another who's interested like for on mortgage book. So what type of infrastructure is required like so currently like which is not there. So what type of infrastructure need to be built. So this is what my question, sir. Last question.
Ramdasu, infrastructure part, if you take that managing the large volume of transaction, that probably is one of the back-end requirement, the front-end requirement. That is the infrastructure, what you say, that is one thing. Second was Beneath had just mentioned a very important point that if investor want to exit, and if the market itself is not having the liquidity and the secondary market is not having the buyers, where they should go. So probably to begin with or to contaminize the RMBS market, if the regulator or the government brings some institution where if any investor want to exit, he can get out of that. That is one thing. Second, probably the one thing is that the credit enhancement, all those things are available, but the pool should also have some sort of guarantee or something sort of from the lenders, like long term back, sometime back, the Reserve Bank of India asked the banker to provide credit enhancement in case of NCD issuance. In this case, to give more comfort to the buyer, till they know that the pool is rated and pool has a liquidity, some sort of comfort, one for absorbing their buying the in secondary market by any government body or any institution, maybe SIDBI or maybe NHB or maybe any organization who should have a pool of fund, they can buy it. The investor will have confidence that I can exit any point of time, because investors are looking various instruments to invest. The more thing that investor interest has to be developed. One, as he mentioned, that they should have a price, attractive pricing, safety, and third more important point, that they should have the exit options. If these things are there, that is what, if to begin with, if some organization has to be created to buy out the instrument, then automatically it will start happening. Or the regulator can give mandate to whether SEBI or anybody, to various institutions like PFRDA, insurance companies. Why can't you invest in that? There has to be, that is one thing that can happen. If large pension fund, PF fund, all these are encouraged to certain percentage that you have to invest in this market, probably this will happen.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So with this, like, we are, a lot of questions are there, like, so we are not able to take it because of time is not this thing. Already we are for 15 minutes, like, across that, the planned timeline. So thank you all the participants for participating, and the panelists also. We are very, we are thankful for participating and spending with us. Just thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.